thought it was rather appalling. I found it mind-numbingly bureaucratic, flat, bloodless. He was almost inside baseball describing how bureaucracies work. And his conclusions, his directive number one is that high-priority intelligence will now have to be treated urgently, not just some of the time, but all of the time. Well, that's a remarkable advance. And then he said at the beginning, the first conclusion is that in this world, timely intelligence, etc., is of the utmost importance. Well, this is a president who, after we seized Abdul Muttalib, who had extremely timely intelligence regarding Yemen, who had just been armed and trained in Yemen, was given a lawyer and Miranda rights and shut up almost immediately after singing at the beginning about everything he knew. That is the timeliest of intelligence regarding Yemen, which the president's terrorism advisor said today is the newest and the most aggressive and the most surprising al-Qaeda element in the world. Here's information waiting to be gleaned and received, and we are gratuitously giving away. Talking about not connecting the dots, the administration has little control over what happens before a terror attack, but it had total control over what happened afterwards, and it blew it.
National Security Advisor Jim Jones, Mara, started by telling USA Today, and it was a soundbite that we heard a couple times today, that the American people might be shocked by this review, shocked what's in it and the details. And were you shocked?
Well, you know, it's unclear in retrospect what he meant. Either there were things that were shocking that ended up not being in the president's statement, and
which could be the reason for the delay.
Might have been, we don't know. Or he did say that people will be shocked, will be surprised that these correlations weren't made. What I did think was actually shocking in the review is it was a scathing indictment of the intelligence failure. That I did think was shocking. I mean, the fact that not only were the dots not connected, but there was a failure to understand the intelligence, not just to connect the pieces, but to understand it. I mean, that's pretty damning. I thought there was a lot of this that was damning about the intelligence community. Maybe that's what he meant.
What about the president's original statement on 12/28? Here's what he said.
This incident, like several that have preceded it, demonstrates that an alert and courageous citizenry are far more resilient than an isolated extremist.
Now, who put that in that speech? I mean, he's not firing anybody, calling for any resignations, but who put isolated extremists in that 12/28 speech?
They spoke too soon. I mean, in the beginning, the message was one guy, lone guy, only one person. We learned later, and the president did talk later about how this was al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula.
Steve?
Well, that's a really good question. How does the president come out 3 days after the attack and make that kind of a categorical statement that this was an isolated extremist? I mean, remember, Robert Gibbs has said that we had usable, actionable intelligence from Abdul Muttalib almost immediately. If that's the case, unless he was providing actionable intelligence about himself, of course he was talking about the conspiracy. Of course he was talking about who had trained him and who had provided him with the arms or things of that nature.
And
so
they also called him a known terrorist at one point.
Yeah, it was an interesting shift. In his comments today, the president called him a known terrorist, whereas before he had referred to him as a suspect. And what was potentially interesting about that was in the subsequent session with John Brennan and Janet Napolitano, Brennan took a question about why he was referred to as a known terrorist this time, and he really couldn't give an answer. He really struggled to say, to explain why the president would call him a known terrorist. And it does, I think, raise the question, at least, as to what wasn't in the president's remarks today. What did they cut out? What was not declassified to share with the American public that might have been more shocking than what we heard?
We point to that briefing afterwards, and it happened late in the day. But both Brennan and Napolitano were asked what they found shocking in this review, and here's what they said.
But we didn't know they had progressed to the point of actually launching individuals here. And we have taken that lesson, and so now we're all on top of it.
I think following up on that, not just the determination of al-Qaeda and al-Qaeda Arabian Peninsula, but the tactic of using an individual to foment an attack as opposed to a large conspiracy or a multi-person conspiracy such as we saw on 9/11. That is something that affects intelligence.
Steve?
I mean, I really do not understand how she survives saying this. I think it's almost as bad as her claim that the system worked immediately after. She's surprised by the determination of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula to attack us? Really?
Well, she's saying with individuals.
Well, and that was the more troubling part. First of all, she's surprised at the determination. Secondly, she's surprised that they're using individuals as a tactic. I mean, the shoe bomber Richard Reed was. There have been small conspiracies, 1 or 2 people, Ayman Ferris, the truck bomber, and others for the past 8 years. It's as if she hasn't read a newspaper for a decade.
Charles.
Look, it's quite remarkable. You've got to ask yourself, why did the president speak today? What exactly was the news he gave us? It was a recap. Perhaps he was undoing the impression he gave 2 days ago, in which he blamed everybody on his team, and he said, there's been people haven't been held accountable, there've been mistakes, and he kind of in his usual way hovered above it like regally. And today he grudgingly offered the buck stops here, although there are the consequences of that it doesn't mean anything. He says it and then he moves on. So it's not exactly clear to me in what way he advanced anything here other than to make an appearance, to announce a lot of bureaucratic steps, which are, we haven't even discussed them because they are so meaningless. And what exactly is he going to do? He says he'll spend an extra $1 billion on security in airports. Well, he could start by allowing, by changing the rules under which 80-year-olds are strip searched, and half of the time of the TSA is wasted on people who obviously aren't going to be a threat to anybody on airplanes.
We thought this was important. We're going to spend 2 panels on it. We're going to examine the political fallout from what the president calls the screw-up when we come back.